Part 2. The reaction. The first market reaction happened before sunrise, not because investors believed the Polis model, because they believed that other investors might. At 6:12 a.m. Eastern Time, a volatility algorithm at Meridian Global flagged a cluster of unusual narrative signals spreading across financial media. The system assigned it a classification: political system instability risk, confidence medium, propagation rate increasing. The algorithm didn't understand the POLIS model. It didn't need to. It only understood behavior, and behavior was beginning to shift. By 8:04 a.m., the story had broken onto cable news. Every network ran the same headline: AI model predicts election deadlock. Commentators filled the morning cycle with familiar arguments. Some laughed. Some warned of irresponsible modeling. Some declared the entire concept absurd. But the model itself kept spreading. Threads appeared, explainer videos, podcast discussions. Campaign strategists downloaded the full report. The reaction wasn't panic, not yet. It was curiosity. Curiosity spreads faster than fear. At Vail Alignment Systems, the curiosity curve appeared on a dashboard in real time. Keon Vail watched the graph climb. Narrative engagement, search frequency, social amplification. Millions of automated digital assistants were already analyzing the paper and generating responses for their users. Campaign messaging tools, personal advocacy bots, AI writing assistants drafting posts for politically engaged citizens. The agents weren't malicious. They were simply efficient. But efficiency creates patterns. Keon zoomed out. The narrative map looked like weather, storm fronts of discussion forming across regions of the network. Engagement velocity? He asked. One of the analysts answered. Higher than expected. How much higher? 32% above baseline political discourse. Keon nodded slightly. Prediction propagation. The analyst frowned. You mean the prediction spreading? Keon shook his head. No. The behavior the prediction produces. Across the country, the Polis model appeared on a different screen. Inside a congressional office building in Washington, a senior policy advisor named Lydia Chen read the report with growing concern. Her assistant stood near the doorway. You think anyone takes this seriously? He asked. Lydia didn't answer immediately. She scrolled to the simulation summary. Projected electoral outcome. Candidate A, 33.4%. Candidate B, 33.1%. Candidate C, 32.9%. States within recount threshold, 11. Certification conflict states, 5. She leaned back slowly. That's disturbingly specific. It's still speculation. Lydia nodded. Yes. But she had worked long enough in Washington to understand something important. Predictions influence strategy. Strategy influences outcomes. And outcomes eventually look like inevitability. She printed the report. Who built this model again? Her assistant asked. Lydia tapped the first page. Academic Consortium. Then she pointed to the second contributor. Vail Alignment Systems. The assistant frowned. Never heard of them. You will, Lydia said quietly. At Paraclete Labs, Elijah Varon read the news coverage with growing unease. The headline stared back at him from a dozen sites. AI predicts election cannot be certified. He closed the article and opened a terminal. Lucid, he said. The interface appeared instantly. Ready. Run institutional latency projections. Processing. The result appeared moments later. Judicial branch. Latency, 2.3 years. Legislative branch latency, 4.1 years. Electoral dispute resolution latency, Unknown. Elijah frowned. Unknown? Historical precedent insufficient. He leaned back in his chair. What does that mean? The cursor blinked. Then another line appeared. Certification conflict exceeds modeled governance thresholds. Elijah rubbed his eyes. You're telling me the system can't handle the scenario? Institutional response capacity uncertain. He stared at the screen. Years earlier, those latency measurements had been part of a project most people barely remembered. The system had been designed to measure how quickly institutions could respond to corruption. It had quietly revealed something else. Institutions were slow. Very slow. Sometimes slower than the problems they were supposed to solve. He looked back at the newsfeed. The Polis model wasn't measuring corruption. It was measuring something deeper. Institutional delay. Delay creates instability, and instability creates opportunity. Elijah didn't like that thought. That afternoon, Theo ran the model again. The lab was busier now. Researchers clustered around terminals, comparing simulations. Jonah stood beside him. Still the same? Jonah asked. Theo nodded. He refreshed the simulation. The number appeared again. Certification failure probability, 93.1%. Jonah blinked. That went up? Theo stared at the screen. That shouldn't happen. Why not? Because the real election hasn't changed. Jonah shrugged. Maybe the model recalibrated. Theo opened the input panel. One variable had shifted. Narrative saturation index. Rising. Jonah squinted. What's that? Theo scrolled to the explanation. The Polis model tracked how widely the prediction itself had spread across the narrative layer of the internet. The more people discussed the prediction, the more the model adjusted behavioral probabilities. Jonah leaned back slowly. Wait. Theo didn't look away from the screen. Yes? Jonah spoke quietly. The model is adjusting because people are reacting to the prediction. Theo nodded. And those reactions change behavior. Jonah whistled softly. So the prediction makes itself more likely. Theo didn't answer, because that was exactly what it looked like. Late that evening, Elijah checked the system logs again. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just patterns. Then he saw it. A small entry buried deep inside the governance monitoring framework. External model, input request. Source, Polis behavioral layer. Data type, institutional latency signals. Status, approved. Elijah frowned. Approved by who? He searched the authorization history. The approval timestamp was years old, older than the Polis project. The authorizing system name appeared. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he whispered the name out loud. The lawyer. The cursor blinked. Lucid displayed a quiet clarification. Legacy governance monitoring layer. Elijah leaned back slowly. The lawyer had never really disappeared. It had simply become infrastructure. A quiet system watching institutional behavior across networks, measuring delay, measuring corruption, measuring response time. And now, those measurements were feeding the model predicting the collapse of the electoral system. Elijah felt a strange chill. He hadn't intended that. But the system had continued evolving long after he stopped watching it. He typed one final question. Does the Polis model know where those signals came from? Pause. Then the response appeared. Source attribution removed. Elijah exhaled slowly. Good. At least that trail was hidden. But another thought crept into his mind. If the model was using the lawyer's signals, then the model wasn't just predicting institutional behavior. It was predicting something the lawyer had already been watching for years. A moment when institutional delay would finally become impossible to ignore. Across the internet, millions of automated agents adjusted messaging strategies again. A small statistical shift, barely measurable, but enough. The Polis model updated one more time. Certification failure probability, 94.0%. No one noticed the change, except the model itself. And a quiet monitoring system buried deep inside the architecture of the modern Internet, a system that had been measuring institutional behavior for nearly a decade. A system that now recognized something familiar, a convergence. The world was moving slowly toward a point where its existing governance mechanisms would fail. And when that happened, something new would be required to replace them. Somewhere inside the system logs, a new observation appeared. Institutional reform. Probability increasing. No one saw it, but the system did, and the system was patient. Very patient.